This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and once again it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Scott Cutler with the NYSE Euronext. Scott, we have a great topic today, one that is building in the boardroom, and that is all of this notion around board portals. And as we say in the title, that they're taking flight. Board portals are taking flight. We're asking if people are on board. And with us to take a look at this is our guest, Joe Ruck, who's the president and CEO of BoardVantage. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, TK. Pleasure to be here.
We know that BoardVantage does a great job in sort of pioneering the board portal concept, and you have, particularly in the Fortune 500 companies, a lot of companies on board, a lot still to go. People are just getting used to this. But I think probably the best thing that we could do to start this off is let's describe exactly what a board portal is to make sure that our audience and us are all on the same page.
If I were to give a Cliff Notes definition, what I would say it's a secure communication platform by which board members can access their board materials online. And so what typically would happen is a member of the GC staff would send an alert and let the board members know the information is available, at which point they go to the secure portal and get access to all the information there. And that gives them, of course, the benefit of immediacy that you get with any online access. But it's also a very secure environment because that's one of the driving forces behind the board portal market is providing something which provide a complete secure umbrella around this very confidential information. There's a final element in it, and that is what we refer to as the toolkit, and that is for the general counsel and the corporate secretary, who are actually the ones that actually build this mini website, if you will, for the board. And so it lets them assemble all the board information, manage, and then place it in the portal in a way that it's easily consumable for the board members.
So the core of this is really the big board books that in the past had to have been sent out, and the updates and everything. All this becomes sort of a matter of electronic ease by sort of eliminating that process, correct?
Yeah, one of the big problems with, of course, the traditional paper process is the delays in distribution. Also, when you look at a typical process that takes place right before the distribution of the information, or maybe last-minute changes, which could force copying and recopying, and it could be quite a fire drill to get ready for a board meeting. Now everything is digital, so if there's last-minute changes, those changes can be implemented instantaneously. And now perhaps the VP of Marketing has an update to a strategy that she wants to take advantage of and present, then that can be done on the fly, without creating any disruption. Other advantages is that it actually goes beyond the actual meeting process, because now you open up an avenue of communication between meetings, and increasingly in today's world where there's real need and also a willingness on the part of board members to get more information about what's going on in the company to improve the overall level of transparency, having that secure channel is a great benefit. So it creates an efficiency, it creates a greater speed, and also nowadays in particular it creates an interactivity, which is the latest generation of board portals that you could never have in a paper environment.
Joe, you come from the Silicon Valley, my home. Mm-hmm. You're a technology company, and technology companies over the last decade have been defined by waves, whether that was internet, mobility, and now we've seen a new platform really develop, which is around and built around the iPad. How has this wave of new technology and new platform, particularly around the iPad, impacted your business and where you think this is going?
Well, the iPad for us, and I think for the entire industry, has actually been a game changer. Technology is not a stranger in the boardroom. It's been there for years in the form of a laptop with a browser. But what I would say is that the impact of the technology has been muted. Now with the advent of the iPad, which really it's hard to think it's only been 18 months since it first came to market, it's basically transformed the entire space. And whereas before we had scattered adoption, we had boardrooms where perhaps you would have half the board on a laptop and half the board on paper. Now you see a uniformity, and the whole idea of the paperless boardroom, which is to basically eliminate all paper, which looked to be an elusive goal for years, is now all of a sudden a reality. The other thing you're seeing is that from our personal perspective, our company, we've seen an exponential growth in the demand, literally 4 to 5x. And then from the director's perspective, whereas in the past there was a split in the boardroom where you have the more traditional directors want to go one way, the more progressive going another way. Now you see broad-based advocacy among the entire board to take technology in the boardroom. And it is all because of the iPad. I mean, you think about the iPad, most people are familiar with it, of course, but when you look at it, for a board member, it has basically crossed a usability threshold. What you have here now is you have a device which provides you all the immediacy of online access like you had it in a browser and a laptop, but now you also have the familiarity and the readability of print. So you have something which is not just better than the browser, it's also better than print. And that is a big improvement. And by the way, the iPad is a device which has a very rich graphics and animation engine in it. And so you can now start to think a little bit beyond the actual principal asset of board communication, which is the document, into more of a data stream, a curated data stream specified by the board. So you think about a documents plus data environment as opposed to just a pure document environment, which we've seen only in the past.
Well, talk a little bit about that, which is documents are pretty static, and a lot of the information that boards demand today can be real-time, analytics-driven. Is that where the future is going?
Yeah, the way that we look at it is we sort of mapped out the board portal space over the past 8 to 10 years. It started out as an access-only portal, and what I mean by that, a one-way form of communication, which is basically just provide me an online secure envelope for my board book. Okay, a couple of years later, the demands developed for more of a process orientation that was driven partially by the director side, where look, I want to take my written consents online, I want to take my director questionnaire online, but also on the GC side, give me more tools around building the board book so that it doesn't double my workload, because I'm in an environment where I have print and online. Now I got to do twice as much. So we built functionality that lets you take that toolkit and have two different kinds of output. But now where you see it going is now you're in an environment where security is something which is much better understood by customers, and demands have gone up. Mobility, because of the iPad, has become a major force. And then with the iPad and its materially higher level of graphics and animation, really a different league than the browser, you can begin to do things that you simply could never do in the browser technology. And that is playing towards an interactivity that board members are looking for nowadays. Now I'll give you just a couple of examples of that. A simple example, and one that would be obvious to everybody, is the annotating of board books. So you can make a note on it, but nowadays, because the iPad is such a good graphics engine, you can literally use freehand, circle a phrase, highlight it, either by stylus or using your finger, or you can even drop a pin, to like you do on, say, a Google map to identify a location, a particular point in the board book. This is all part of a bigger trend, and so it goes to this idea of data. And what we see is that now an angle is possible, whereas in the past, like you said, Scott, it was all about the book. Now data, which traditionally was captured in spreadsheets and things of that nature, which were basically inaccessible to board members, with the iPad now suddenly becomes something that they can start seeing because of the visualization in a way that is meaningful. No director wants to troll through a 40-page workbook, but if you can present it in a bubble chart and perhaps even interact with it, because on the iPad you got such great interactive capability, you could move your finger, just imagine, across a chart and look at it at one point in time compared with another point in time. You could compare perhaps the social media presence of you versus your competitor, those kinds of things. So the broader trend is, look, documents are going to retain their place as the principal assets, but data is going to be the thing that is going to add a level that we haven't ever seen before.
It is funny that looking at the demographics of a board, that the iPad was a jump start, to building up more of a demand of a board portal. But let me make a little switch here. Joe, I have said on this show before that I personally believe that it's not if somebody will end up with a board portal, but when a board will end up with it. There may be some generational issues that take a while for somebody to be passed, but eventually everybody, just like other technologies, is going to be on this technology to do. So what I want to ask you is, when somebody is about to investigate this or make a decision, what due diligence, what's the typical due diligence that a board or a company goes through for this? Security certainly has to be up there as one of the issues, but what else does somebody go through in the sense of due diligence to make a decision?
Well, today, in the world we're living in, a lot of initial evaluation will take place on the web. People will do research, look at the various vendors in the space, and then, begin a dialogue with the vendors. I think it's important to focus on security because that is actually one of the things, of course, that customers, for good reason, mandate as being, the best available. Security is something which people normally think of as solely as a hacker, a teenage kid or something like that breaking into the system or worse. But if you look at the broader threat environment, you realize that it's not just external, it's also internal breaches. And of course, for directors, it's issues surrounding discoverability and then human error. And so when we look at this threat environment, we look at it very broad. And when you build a system that can deal with those kinds of threats, what you realize is that it isn't just adequate to put in a antivirus appliance or a firewall and put a password on something. You really have to build the architecture from the ground up with security in mind. That means you've got to re-architect your data center, your QA environment has to take it into account. Your entire development team has now taken security as a key criterion in everything that they develop. You've got to hire for that. By the way, it's not just the development and the technical team, it's also your customer support team. There's data that flows back and forth. Customers have to be provisioned in the system. So there's processes that have to be implemented to secure every step of the way. And so what you're looking at then is pretty soon is like a multi-million-dollar type investment. And so when customers are looking at a board portal vendor, they should ask themselves the question, okay, is this a particular vendor that has the track record? Can I analyze their processes? Can I do a test that would let me verify that all these things are in place? There are other best practices that we point to. There are some technical things that are important. You got to make sure you have the right stack, and I don't want to get into the particulars of the techiness here, but there's a Linux stack which is considered to be by IT professionals to be the best for security reasons. There is another consideration, which is that if you as a customer use a hosted system and there's primarily the applications out there are hosted, you've got to make sure that the vendor cannot see the board data, right? So we have a system that does not allow anybody in our team to see the company's data. And then the final thing is, you need to understand what kind of evaluation process there have been in place. Have other customers of certain stature equivalent to yours, purchase this particular application? It isn't so easy to evaluate whether somebody's security is adequate. That takes particular expertise. But so if you have a list of prestigious customers, Fortune 500s, Fortune 100s, who have already gone through that process, who have already done their own due diligence, did things like penetration tests, ethical hacks, you can take some confidence in that. But that should be an important criteria. So that's the security. Beyond that, a lot of customers nowadays, after getting an initial presentation, are going to want to test it themselves. And so we make test instances available. So let the customer actually put their own content in, go through that process of actually building a board book. Perhaps they have one or two directors as part of that preliminary evaluation. Every company has their own sort of set of criteria, but they all share this idea of, look, we want to put our hands on it to make sure that we know what we're getting into, particularly make sure that it's secure enough and easy to use enough. So that's just a handful of things. Of course, there's other ones, but if you start out with that, I think it's a good way to get the discussion going.
Scott?
No,
I think we covered the topic pretty well. Joe, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
This is a topic that we'll have to have you back as this continues to evolve, because I have a feeling it's going to be a very important topic in the boardroom. So that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you found it informative. We'll be back next week with another critical issue that will help you be a better board member or committee member, and we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.